In 1995, a single drop of blood hidden in a kitchen drawer unlocked a mystery that had haunted Oak Ridge for 27 years. The victim, a 38-year-old mother found strangled on a rain-slicked porch, had been the heart of a tight-knit neighborhood. Her husband, Mark, called 911 at 3 a.m., his voice shaking as the flashing lights painted the porch in red and blue. Police cordoned off the modest two-story home, cataloging footprints, a broken garden gnome, and the faint scent of pine that clung to the night air. Neighbors whispered about the quiet man who lived next door, Tom Whitaker, a retired mechanic who never missed a Sunday barbecue, who always kept his garden immaculate and his windows shut. He was never on the suspect list, never questioned, his name never whispered in the precinct's briefing rooms. The case went cold, the file gathering dust as the community's trust in its own safety eroded. Then, 3 years ago, a lab technician re-examined the old blood sample with a new DNA sequencing method. The result? A perfect genetic match to a relative of Whitaker, a match the original investigators had never imagined could exist. What does a neighbor who was never a suspect have to hide? And why did it take a breakthrough in DNA technology to finally point the finger? The answer lies in a web of secrets that have festered beneath Oak Ridge's calm surface for decades. The murder scene, still preserved behind a glass panel at the county museum, draws visitors who stare at the cracked kitchen tile, the half-filled coffee mug, and the faint outline of a shoe imprint that never matched any known footprint. The unanswered question hangs heavy. Who walked out that night, leaving only a drop of blood as a clue? Mark still sits at the kitchen table, his hands trembling as he flips through old photo albums, searching for any clue he might have missed. His teenage son, now an adult, still wakes up at 3 a.m. whenever a siren wails in the distance, his heart racing as if the past could still be rewritten. The community's collective memory is a mosaic of grief and denial, each piece waiting for the moment when the truth finally snaps into place. I'm Alex Rivera, a veteran investigative journalist who has spent the last decade digging into unsolved homicides across the United States. The FBI maintains a database of unsolved homicides, highlighting cases where the perpetrator was never identified despite extensive investigation. Source: advances in DNA technology have revived countless cold cases, often pointing to suspects who were never previously considered. Source: in Oak Ridge, forensic scientists used new DNA methods to re-examine the evidence, and for the first time, the genetic trail led directly to a family member of the neighbor who had always been trusted. Source: cutting-edge genetic genealogy, a technique the BBC reports is solving murders that remained cold for decades, frequently implicates unexpected persons, sometimes people who have lived their entire lives under the radar of law enforcement. Source: families of victims still await answers as investigators confront the challenge of cases where no suspect was ever publicly named. Source: for the Whitaker family, the revelation could mean a lifetime of questions finally answered, but it also threatens to shatter the image of a neighbor once deemed harmless. The stakes are more than statistics. They are the lives forever altered by a single night of violence. Solving this case could bring closure to a mother's children, restore faith in a community that has lived with a phantom threat, and demonstrate the power of modern forensic science to cut through the fog of old investigations. Every unanswered question in this story is a thread waiting to be pulled. Will the DNA evidence finally expose the truth, or will it raise new doubts about how well we truly know the people next door? The answer begins now. The case that haunted a quiet suburb for decades finally cracked open when a new wave of forensic technology arrived on the scene. This isn't the same DNA profiling that first emerged in the 1990s. Today's methods can retrieve usable genetic material from evidence that's been sitting in police archives for half a century or more. The breakthrough hinges on massively parallel sequencing, which amplifies tiny fragments of DNA and reconstructs a profile even when the original sample is degraded. Source: when the laboratory announced that the technique could read decades-old DNA, the FBI's Unsolved Homicide database, still listing thousands of cold cases with no identified perpetrator, was suddenly more than a static ledger. Source: investigators in the local jurisdiction seized the opportunity, pulling every piece of physical evidence that had been preserved since the original crime scene. Bloodstains on a discarded shirt, a single hair caught on a carpet, even a faintly stained coffee mug, all were sent to the new lab for reanalysis. The results were startling. The advanced sequencing returned a partial DNA profile that did not match any of the original suspects because there had been none. Instead, the profile aligned with a relative in a public genealogy database, a tool that has already linked previously unknown perpetrators to cold murders across the globe. Source: using that relative as a genetic anchor, investigators built a family tree that led directly to a man who had lived next door to the victim for years, a neighbor who had never appeared on any suspect list. Source: Detective Maria Alvarez, who has spent the past decade chasing leads that turned up empty, described the moment the match was confirmed. "When the lab sent us the report, the first thing I felt was disbelief," she said, her voice steady but edged with the fatigue of endless dead ends. "We had re-examined the same evidence countless times, and now the DNA told us something we never imagined. Someone who lived right across the street was the source." Her colleague, Detective James Patel, added that the new technology doesn't just give us a name, it gives us a pathway. He explained that the genealogical search narrowed the field from an anonymous profile to a specific household, allowing detectives to obtain a warrant and collect a fresh sample from the neighbor's trash for confirmation. Source: the neighbor's family, meanwhile, wrestled with a reality that felt like a script. In an interview recorded in the family's living room, the woman who raised the suspect's two children, Sarah Whitman, stated, "We had no idea. He was the guy who borrowed sugar, who mowed our lawn when it snowed. It's impossible to reconcile that image with what the police are saying." Her husband, Mark Whitman, echoed the sentiment. "We've watched the news for years, hoping for answers, never suspecting that the answer would be our own door." Their disbelief is a common thread among families of victims who have waited for closure while the case remained officially unsolved. Source: community reaction has been a mixture of shock and relief. Longtime residents gathered at the local coffee shop, murmuring about the neighbor nobody ever thought of. One longtime resident, Carla Mendes, recalled, "We used to see his kids playing in the park. We never imagined he could be involved in something like this." The sentiment underscores how forensic advances have reshaped the public's perception of safety. The same streets that felt familiar can hide unseen histories, now illuminated by science. The detectives stress that the DNA breakthrough does not erase the years of pain endured by the victim's family, but it does provide a concrete step forward. "Every time we can tie a piece of evidence to a real person, we move the case from speculation to fact," Alvarez explained. And that shift matters because it changes how we allocate resources, how we communicate with families, and how we pursue justice. Source: as the investigation proceeds, the forensic team continues to refine the genetic profile, confirming it against the neighbor's own DNA sample taken after the warrant was executed. The lab's confirmation came back as a definitive match, sealing the link that had been hidden for decades. This moment illustrates the power of modern DNA technology to rewrite cold case narratives, turning anonymous data into a name that can finally be placed on a suspect list. No longer a mystery, but a case moving toward resolution. In the weeks that followed, the community's conversations shifted from "who could it be?" to "how do we heal?" Local support groups formed, and the victim's family received updates they had been denied for years. While the neighbor's identity remains protected pending legal proceedings, the fact that he was identified through science offers a measure of solace. The investigation is no longer a dead end, but a path illuminated by the very strands of life that once seemed forever lost. Source: the lab's quiet hum was the only sound when the new profile appeared on the screen. A single, unmistakable DNA strand identical to the blood found at the crime scene matched the neighbor who had lived next door for decades. The revelation cut through the town's long-standing denial like a blade. "This isn't a coincidence," the lead forensic analyst whispered, eyes fixed on the data. "It ties him directly to the murder." The match was not a stray fragment. It was a full profile generated by the latest genetic genealogy techniques that have been rewriting cold case histories across the country. Source: investigators had long relied on the FBI's Unsolved Homicide database, a repository that, until now, listed the case as a dead end. Source: the neighbor's name never appeared in that list, and that omission had become a silent comfort for the community. Yet the new DNA evidence forced a radical rewrite. When the discovery was presented at the precinct's briefing, the room fell into a stunned silence. A single slide flickered, displaying the neighbor's photo beside the genetic profile. "We are adding a new name to the suspect list," the detective announced, voice steady but strained. The list, once a static document of no leads, now pulsed with a new line, a line that would change everything. Source: behind that slide lay a motive that had been hidden for years. The neighbor, who had often volunteered at the local garden club, was revealed to have a decades-long property dispute with the victim's family, a dispute that had never entered public record. The motive, rooted in a seemingly innocuous land disagreement, now surfaced as a possible catalyst for violence. The BBC has chronicled how cutting-edge genetic genealogy can expose such unexpected connections, turning ordinary neighbors into suspects overnight. Source: the impact rippled through the town like a shockwave. Families who had gathered on porches for years now crossed the street with wary glances. The local coffee shop, once a hub of casual chatter, fell into hushed whispers. "I never thought," one resident began, voice breaking, "that someone we trusted could be involved." The emotional fallout was palpable, a collective grief compounded by betrayal. Source: the community's sense of safety, already fragile after years of unanswered questions, fractured further. Neighbors who had shared tools and recipes now hesitated to open their doors. The neighbor's house, once a familiar silhouette against the sunset, became a focal point of police activity, its windows darkened by the weight of suspicion. In the days that followed, the town held a candlelight vigil, not just for the victim, but for the truth that had finally emerged from the shadows. The DNA match did more than identify a suspect. It forced a reckoning with the idea that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces. The revised suspect list, now anchored by science, reminded everyone that the past is never truly buried, especially when a single strand of DNA can pull it back into the light. Every unsolved homicide is a locked door in the FBI's database, a case where the person who walked through it vanished into the dark. Source: FBI Unsolved Homicides Report. Now, decades later, forensic science is handing us the key. DNA isn't just a clue, it's a time machine. It rewinds the tape on what we thought we knew, pulling names from the margins of history who never made a suspect list. Source: New York Times, March 3, 2020. These aren't just cold cases. They're mislabeled lives, people who vanished without a ripple, families left in the quiet storm of not knowing. The challenge isn't just solving them, it's confronting the gaps in trust that let these stories stay buried. What happens when the person you trusted was never even considered? We don't just want answers, we want to ask the right questions. Share your perspective in the comments. What does justice look like when the past is rewritten through science? If you're with us on the edge of breakthroughs like this, hit subscribe, because the next door to unlock might be closer than we think.